Muscle mass is protective against all-cause mortality. And when I make this statement, I know some people get confused by it. They're like, well, what about these 250-pound bodybuilders and these guys at super heavy body weights? This is where the confusion gets created, and I think there's also confusion involved when people look at this not necessarily being the case for people who are living to 90 or 100 plus sometimes with longevity. And again, I think this is where the confusion happens. What I am talking about is the amount of muscle that you can gain purely from diet and lifting weights. Okay? That muscle mass is protective. If you get so big that you are beyond the amount of muscle that could be obtained through those pathways, the extra body weight alone may potentially be an issue, but I don't think that's actually the issue itself, because when we understand how muscle mass protects against a lot of disease, the muscle mass itself would still be protective. In other words, if someone gained another 20 pounds, that's like 10 kilos of pure muscle, over the limit they could with just lifting weights by using stuff, and you guys know what I mean by stuff, the muscle mass itself would still have the health benefits. The problem is the side effects, the atherosclerosis, possibly the elevated blood pressure, all of these problems would be the issue. So we need to be clear there. It is literally the side effects of these substances that would create the health problems, not the actual muscle. Because people come up with silly stuff. They're like, well, your heart has to work harder to... No, actually it doesn't. Believe it or not, gaining 20 pounds of muscle doesn't necessarily make your heart work harder unless you're running marathons. For walking, moving, doing normal day-to-day stuff, it does not. And the reason is because the muscle tissue itself is vascular. Muscle tissue has capillary beds all through it, and the muscles help pump the blood through the muscle tissue itself. So just be aware that isn't actually true. Now, where we run into problems with that, and again, I'll get into a minute of how the muscle actually helps you. Where we run into problems is people mistake muscle and fat. Like they bulk up to a certain body weight, and let's say they're still 20% body fat, and they've gained a ton of muscle, or they're 25% body fat. Well, now you're carrying a lot of extra body weight, and you're carrying a bunch of, slightly outside the healthy range of body fat on top of it. All right, that's a little bit problematic. Do you see where we're going with that? Because a lot of times guys are not as muscular as they think they are. They bulked up to a given body weight, and because they're used to, say, an enhanced lifter being at that body weight, who is leaner, they're assuming, well, maybe they are too, but they're not. They may have, 15 or 20 extra pounds of fat over that guy at the same body weight. So let's get into the topic of how the muscle itself is protective. Muscle tissue is protective against cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes. Straight up. Like this is not even controversial anymore. This is not controversial in the literature. This has been studied. We know the pathways. Everyone always goes, what do you mean we? We, the human race, the body of human knowledge. Doesn't mean that we, as in you and I, have personally done the research. But when you think about it, think about the cancer and the diabetes end alone. All right, this one should be easy. What does muscle tissue that is created through training have? It has a high amount of insulin sensitivity. Okay, that means for all the food that you eat and all the carbs that you eat, your body simply produces less insulin. Okay, if you have another 20 pounds of muscle tissue from lifting weights and building muscle training, your insulin response to every gram of carbohydrate that you eat is lower. It's lower. Gaining a ton of muscle and being fit and lean is actually controls insulin even more than a low-carb diet does. And a lot of people are not aware of that. It is not uncommon for a lifter who is fairly lean with a lot of muscle to have lower circulating insulin levels than someone on a ketogenic diet. And I know the low-carb people get upset when you say, like, it's not possible. I'm like, but it's true. It's absolutely true. And we've seen it with blood work. My blood work actually shows that. My fasting glucose and insulin is very low even when I am eating 500 plus grams of carbohydrates a day on my blood work. So yeah, it's absolutely true. And but we know the pathway. It's not like we don't understand why. The muscle tissue itself is so insulin sensitive, you just don't need much insulin to do its job and to transport all that fuel into your muscle tissue. So your blood glucose stays more stable, your insulin levels tend to be lower, and they tend to just mostly feed muscle tissue. Okay? This makes you resistant to diabetes. In fact, we know lifting weights alone, not even to that level, just lifting weights alone cuts diabetes by 70%. Just that one lifestyle intervention. You don't even have to gain that much muscle for that to occur. Again, when you see lifters who are diabetic, it's because they're using too much growth hormone and insulin. It's part of their substance stack. And a lot of people are unaware of that. They don't know that a lot of lifters actually use insulin, which obviously can make you diabetic, in a worst case scenario. So this makes sense. And the same thing you think of cancer. If circulating insulin levels are lower and the muscle tissue competes with tumors for fuel, tumors grow slower. Therefore, your body and immune system can fight them off more effectively, right? These are easy ones. Cardiovascular is a little more complicated, but it does have to do with when you lift, you tend to have better glucose levels, better insulin control, lower triglycerides, right? Thus, your heart attack risk go down. Okay? Heart attack risk go down. You also, if you have more muscle tissue, you tend to stay leaner easier, which can again help improve lipid levels, right? And again, muscle tissue itself can assist the heart in doing its job. Okay? So you have all of those things going on. So this is why it does that. And then we come over to the issues of sarcopenia. We talk about hip fractures, osteoarthritis, all these things that really start to bury people as they get older. Because we know this, once you are over 50 or over 55, I believe, the research shows that on average, if you have a hip fracture, I think it's something like 90% of people who have their first hip fracture die within 3 years. 90%. Because everything goes downhill at that point. Well, having a respectable squat and building leg muscle and all of these things tends to increase bone density in all those areas. Your hips are less likely to break. Your legs are less likely to break. You're less likely to hurt falling down because your bone density goes up. So building the muscle is protective even against all these other things too. Okay, so this is why. And then think about it. If you've built a lot of muscle when younger, as you start getting towards 70, 80, 90, you're not going to keep all of it. It's going to go down. So people are like, well, you can't walk around at a lean 180 pounds at that age, but you won't be anymore, right? You won't be at that body weight any longer because you're going to lose a lot of the muscle. But if you have a little more, you're still going to be resistant to all these other issues, including the fractures. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.